Hi, I'm Nate Dodson.
I'm Jillian Sidoti.
The United States needs to balance gun rights with proper gun regulations to protect our children, and this is why.
What's the thesis?
My thesis is that there needs to be much better tracking and background requirements to own guns.
Okay.
And that would come from, of course, legislation and regulation. And it's kind of on the cusp, and it's very possible. The people that are fighting against having background searches are just going to fight against any sort of steps to rein in guns.
Mm-hmm.
But we are seeing more and more of these mass shootings, mass killing. And pretty often, so anybody that wants to maim and murder as many as they can for whether it's political, religious, hate, or just craziness reasons, guessing that almost all of them have issues in their past, that it's not a unique first time, oh, surprise, came out of the woodwork and started blasting away.
Right.
Even just the background searches should be able to catch a lot more.
This is where I get a little squirrely, because I'm very much of, we have the right to bear arms. And my argument about right to bear arms used to be more about because we shouldn't be quartering soldiers, right? We have some things in the Constitution now that don't make much sense, because when are we going to quarter soldiers?
It made sense then, but also the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, up until the 2000s, revolved around the right to have a well-regulated militia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for the militia, very traditionally, it was comprised of the people. So the people that were going into the militia had to have guns, had to be at the ready. It's really been changed by the Supreme Court to, no, they forgot about that militia part of the amendment, cut it off entirely. And now it's just, you have a right to all the guns that you want. And then you do have those people that, well, if I want to have a 100-round magazine on my pistol, I should have a right to have that too. And that's, it's just farther and farther outside of the bounds of what the Constitution actually says. And I'm saying it all being a Texan. I believe in guns. I believe in protecting your family, protecting yourself. I think it's a great thing to have. But when we're dealing with the mental health issues of somebody that could willingly go into an elementary school and just murder kids, the innocents, if we're unable as a society to do something to recognize that that's a problem and we should do something about that problem, living in Spain just keeps sounding more and more attractive.
You said some really interesting points there that made me think about other points, which is that the Constitution was written and the Bill of Rights was written during a time when the technology was somewhat limited when it came to firearms, right? We had muskets and some pistols, and most people didn't own a cannon, right?
But you had a right to bear cannons.
And so we're seeing a couple of different evolutions, which is technology has evolved, and the reason keeping a well-organized militia has evolved, and quartering soldiers has evolved. All of these things have evolved. So, for me, I believe in the Second Amendment for sure. I wrote, one of my college papers was on the preservation of the Second Amendment and how I believed that was important. With that being said, my reason, for having firearms, of course, would be to protect myself. And I always felt that the Second Amendment was about protecting yourself from the government, from an unwieldy government. We ain't never going to have enough firearms to protect ourselves from an unwieldy government, not when they have, as we were discussing on another episode, when they have Terminators.
And there are unmanned drones, unmanned tanks currently at war in the Ukraine. It's happening now.
Right.
Your pistol with the 100-round clip ain't going to do anything about that.
No, but have you ever been in Alaska where you thought you were near a brown bear?
Which is why it's important to have guns. So this is there are certain guns that are restricted. Not that you can't get them, and I'm talking about machine gun, guns with silencers. The silencers are heavily regulated. There's an application process. The government gets all of your information. You have to pass that background check. But then you too can have your machine gun with a silencer if you so choose. Now, I'd say there's just an arbitrary line drawn where it says, well, if it's these types of guns, then we want to make sure that you are a proper person to have a gun. Below this line, anybody can buy it. And maybe that line could be brought down a little bit. And kind of the biggest talking item is the kind of AK-47s that seemingly are getting used for a lot of these mass killings. I think all you got to do is kind of look at what guns are being used. Great. Should we really think more about those and protecting people from that type of weapon versus somebody having a pistol in their truck? I love going and shooting shotguns, going and shooting skeet. It's a blast, but nobody's taking a shotgun with...
Pun intended.
I'm glad you caught it. But nobody's taking a shotgun with a couple of rounds and going to try to shoot up a classroom. So it really, there should be some line in there, and maybe we got to figure out that balance a little better.
My thing is that I started this with, I don't know a lot about gun policy. I don't know a lot about, the different sides of the story. I do know that I don't understand how this could happen again after Newtown. And when did Newtown happen? Was that like 2012?
I think you nailed it, like exactly.
Yeah, and that was 26 people, most of whom were 6-year-olds. And you would think that would be enough for us to say, like, okay, let's do something about that. But it hasn't been. So what can we do? My 3 things, I'm going to be honest, I didn't come up with myself. I got from the preventioninstitute.org, but this is what some of their recommendations. They actually have an entire thesis on recommendations on how to solve these problems without rolling back the Second Amendment. The first one is sensible gun laws, which is basically what you're recommending, Nate, which is reducing easy access, that is, to dangerous weapons, those AK-47s. The other thing is establishing, and I think this is huge, goes up. You and I are both libertarians of sorts, so we don't like legislation. We want people to take responsibility themselves. And the second part is that which is establish a culture of gun safety, where we educate and we engage responsible gun dealers and owners and solutions. So if you have, a gun show, really looking out for who you're selling guns to. Now, the argument, of course, is like a lot of these guns are obtained illegally, but I mean, first step is getting them off the streets in general, right? And there's a lot of countries who've done this before. England, Australia, they had turn in your guns, days, and we'll give you something in exchange for them. I don't remember exactly how they went. And then the third thing is another thing you also suggested, which is public health solutions, getting to the root of the problem. Why are people doing this? Why are people thinking it's okay? What happened in their lives and in their mental state to get to this point, and how can we address that before it even becomes an issue for these people, for their families, and for their communities?
I'll never forget, I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and one of the first really mass killings happened there back in the 60s. Somebody runs up in the tower, and one guy running around grabbing rifles and literally shooting people in the middle of the courtyard. But you know what? They managed to, the great way, the police just ran into a gun shop, grabbed a bunch of guns, ran up there and took care of them, took care of the problem. And you know what? We went from that being a first time to now it's like every week it seems like there's some other mass killing. And it's like the mental state of society has changed. And exactly what you're saying, what has happened? I don't know.
Everybody, I'm going to recommend a book to you real quick that actually I think might even address some of those issues. It's an older, well, I wouldn't say it's that old. I think it's from the early 90s. My friend recommended it to me recently. It's called The Celestine Prophecy. It talks about 9 different things that we should be doing in order to making our lives and the lives of others better. It's based on some Eastern religions. I highly recommend it. Check it out, because maybe it'll at least make your mental state better, and then you can put some energy out in the world and make other people's mental state better.
I focus on the positive, and I think you nailed it with that book recommendation.
I am Jillian Sidoti.
And I'm Nate Dodson. Thanks for joining.